recently I got to teach our UM 101 class, which is sort of big picture. Who are United Methodists? What do we believe? What are we about? What are some of the things that define us differently than other mainline Protestants, or different than the Catholic Church, or different from this or that or the other thing? And inevitably in those classes, one of the questions that comes up is, what about this disaffiliation business? Or what about General Conference 2019 or 20? And what happened there, or when is something going to happen with us? And so I've shared that a number of times in those United Methodism classes in our all church meeting that we had in November of 2022. But I want to offer just a video explanation if you're still wondering, or if you're curious, or if maybe you haven't had occasion to listen in on any of those conversations. So, long story, trying to keep it brief, is that in the 1970s, at our General Conference meeting, which is the meeting of the collective body of United Methodists from around the globe, clergy and laity, representative from every annual conference, clergy and lay, and then additional clergy and lay delegates based on the membership within those churches. Sort of like Congress, right? The Senate, you're guaranteed 2 representatives for every state, and then the House is based on how many people in your state. So General Conference is sort of similar. You're guaranteed some representation, but you're given additional representation depending on the size of your congregations cumulatively within your annual conference. So that group meets every 4 years to decide the legislation, our rule book for United Methodists, which is called the Book of Discipline. And in the 1970s, there was language added to the discipline that said homosexuality is incompatible with the Christian scriptures. And that's been a social principle. And from that principle, we have certain church laws that have forbidden gay practicing or partnered clergy from having churches, preventing clergy, straight or gay, from performing gay weddings, and a couple of other rules. And basically, ever since that rule or that principle was instituted with those laws, every 4 years when we come back to General Conference, we argue about it. People wanting to change that, people wanting to keep that, people wanting to make it less stringent or less exclusive, people wanting to make it more stringent. And so it's been this battleground within the church for decades, as it has been in other churches, mainline Protestant churches, primarily. Presbyterians have gone through this, Episcopalians have gone through this, Methodists have been going through this. And there were a couple critical things that happened in 2008 and 2012 dealing with the membership of the global church, giving more votes to the global church, which generally represents a more conservative part of the body. And so then in 2016, again, it was up for debate, as it has been over and over and over again. And the group really came to this landlocked spot of just, we can't make any progress. We can't vote, but beyond that, we can't even have conversation about what we're deciding here and the people that we're deciding about. And it's been this really fraught conversation within the denomination forever. And really just sort of keeps coming up as more and more tense and volatile for Methodists across the connection, as we call it, throughout the denomination around the globe. So 2016, the group is gridlocked. They cannot come to any kind of position moving forward. And so they say to the Council of Bishops, the group of bishops, they say, lead us. Clearly, we're not handling this very well. We need help. We want to move forward. We want to figure this out, but we are so split and so diverse as a body. We need help. So do your job, bishops, and lead us. And the bishops came back with a very Methodist answer, and they said, we will form a committee. Because that's what we do. We decide everything by committee, right? So they formed the commission and said, we will hold a special general conference just to deal with this issue. All the other business will wait until 2020, but in 2019, we are going to deal with this question of queer inclusion and homosexuality within the United Methodist Church. So their committee of 31 or 32 included bishops and laity and clergy from around the world, across the US, and they presented 3 different plans. And going into General Conference 2019, the plans were, I think progressives thought we were going to go one of two ways. And it ended up that at General Conference, we went the third way. And the third way was stricter against our queer siblings, stricter punishments, more severe punishments for gay clergy and any clergy that performed a gay union or a gay wedding. And the moderate and the conservative part of the church was sort of stunned that even came out as the vote. There was a sort of exception for what's called the trust clause within the church, and the trust clause is what says, the church operates within their building and they have their facilities and their property, but at the end of the day, if a church closes, if the church dies, or if the congregation says, we don't want to be United Methodist anymore, the conference says that's fine, but all of your buildings and property, that belongs to the annual conference. So the trust clause is what sort of holds building and property secure for the annual conferences and the denomination against an individual congregation. So in 2019, they sort of suspended the trust clause and said, if churches want to leave, they can leave, and they can take their buildings and their property for a cost. So there's a cost involved. And when that happened, the progressives in the church, which is largely the West, but not exclusively the West, was sort of stunned, and churches were considering, what are we doing? Do we have to disaffiliate? Are we going to have to take a church vote? What are we going to do? A lot of our churches hadn't even had conversations. A lot of them are mixed, right? With people representing all different perspectives and values. And so to take that vote wasn't going to be an easy, we're in camp A or we're camp B, but we were going to be dividing churches and people and congregations. So really painful work that was happening, and there were lots of discussions about what else can we do, and can we fix this somehow? Can we create repair? Can we create a future? If we're creating a new denomination that is more affirming, more progressive, like what does that even look like? And how are we dealing with maybe other issues that exist within the institution of the church? And so, long story short, because it's a long story and there are far more details that I am leaving out, we sort of had a couple folks sort of calm the storm, stay the severity of penalties, and say, let's come back to this in 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. There was no regularly scheduled general conference because of the COVID pandemic. It was rescheduled for late in 2021. And even then, with access to vaccines and the global church, we said, nope, that's not going to work either. So then it was postponed to May of 2022. And again, still the pandemic was rearing its head. So we weren't able to have that meeting. And at that point, they said, we're just going to wait 2 full years to our normally scheduled general conference in 2024. And when that wait was published, the conservative body within the United Methodist Church, which has been known as the Wesleyan Covenant Association, basically came out and said, we're starting our own denomination called the Global Methodist Church. That was May 1st of 2022. And so the conservative churches were then working towards disaffiliation, leaving the United Methodist denomination, working within that exception around the trust clause so that they could take their property for a buyout price. And so those churches have been making that move. So sort of big picture, what's been happening in the United Methodist Church and sort of in the last few years. And some folks are still asking, so are we as Wenatchee First United Methodist Church going to take a vote? Well, the vote that we thought we might have to take in 2019 is very different than the vote that would be taken now. The vote in 2019 likely would have been to disaffiliate, to be part of a more progressive United or Methodist movement, not necessarily United, but Methodist movement, so that we could be queer affirming in our practices, so that we could have queer clergy, so we can fully include our queer siblings within the life of the church. That's what we thought we might be voting for in 2019. But now, with the creation of the Global Methodist Church and the conservative churches leaving, while the current language around in the United Methodist Church is still exclusive, there's a lot more potential and hope within the moderates to the progressives to say, okay, now in 2024, we can officially change our language so that we can be a fully inclusive denomination. And so to be the progressive church that we are here at Wenatchee First, we no longer have to vote to leave to be able to live sort of wholly and fully within that identity. So we aren't taking a vote. We aren't trying to take a vote because we don't think that we need to. And the other part of all of that is that the Western jurisdiction has been largely progressive as the whole unit, Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Idaho, Rocky Mountain, the Big Sky Conference, Cal Nevada, Cal Pac, Desert Southwest, all of them in the West lean progressive and inclusive and have been practicing as an inclusive and affirming church for more than a decade. Not forever and ever, though, pockets here and there for much longer, but sort of on the whole, within the Western jurisdiction, they've been practicing that affirming stance for more than a decade. And so here locally, not much really has to change. We already ordain queer clergy. We already allow our clergy to do gay unions. We already are part of this conversation and this movement to be open and affirming. So for us here at Wenatchee First, we consider ourselves to be an open and affirming church. Still with work to do, but definitely open and affirming. We are within an open and affirming annual conference that is within an open and affirming jurisdiction. And we believe that the United Methodist Church, as it will be after the disaffiliations happen for the Global Methodist Church, will be able to finally change the language within the Book of Discipline. So that is our universal and public stance as a denomination. So that's a longer video than I normally do, but certainly the very abbreviated version of what's been happening in the church and sort of where we stand. Please know I'm always happy to field questions about this or anything within the life of the church, and I'm happy to be helpful so that we all have greater understanding about who we are, what we stand for, and what it means for our day-to-day ministries. Take care, friends.